Hey everyone, it's on Just Restart. So, what if I told you I finally figured out where Breath of the Wild takes place in the Legend of Zelda timeline? You'll probably think I'm just some other random hoo-ha on the internet who's just speaking his mind. It is true, however, I do believe that I found enough evidence within the text of Hyrule Historia to support my claim. So, let's get started. So first off, I was actually doing research about the Great Plateau because I wanted to make a video about the Great Plateau and the history about it and the origins and what exactly is going on there, because I think it's really mysterious and really cool. I mean, after all, it's this giant region that is raised up high above the ground. It's secluded from the rest of society in the world of Hyrule. No one outside can get into it. It's just really mysterious and interesting. It even has a Temple of Time and these ruins. So what exactly is going on here? Well, I believe that we can get a good idea of what may be going on by looking at evidence that we can take from the old man. He tells us that this is supposedly the birthplace of Hyrule. Okay, if it's the birthplace of Hyrule, then we should be looking at Skyward Sword for perhaps some sort of evidence there, or at least a significance, something that can give us a better idea of what's going on. And well, when we think about it, at the end of Skyward Sword, pieces of Skyloft come down and return to the land because the goddess initially sent them back up. So there are pieces of land that can go up and down, but it converges to the ground, and from there Hyrule begins. The Master Sword is placed in the temple, and eventually the Temple of Time is built there, and that's where it's housed, and then it's all used to seal away the Sacred Realm, and then Hyrule begins. And you know, we have the era of prosperity and the Civil War and Minish Cap and all that good stuff. And eventually, it all leads to the events of Ocarina of Time, where everything splits at the end. But during Ocarina of Time, Ganondorf leads a campaign to take over Hyrule, and he destroys Castle Town and Hyrule Castle. It's all left in ruin. And it's believed by many that the ruins we find in the Great Plateau are the same ruins from Ocarina of Time. That's really cool. But does it have any significance? Potentially. Now, first off, when we consider that this could be the same central Hyrule, the same birthplace of Hyrule, wouldn't it all be in central Hyrule on the map in Breath of the Wild? Right? I mean, that would make sense, except it's not. It's not there at all. It's very far away. How? If it was really once there, how did it get there? Why? Well, I started thinking that there could be a lot of different... I had a lot of different theories, really. I was thinking, oh, maybe it has to do with Link, or maybe it has to do with getting the birthplace of Hyrule away from Calamity Ganon. But I started to think that it just didn't really add up. Like, moving an entire piece of the land far away from Central Hyrule just to protect Link seems like a bit of an extraordinary measure, a little excessive, because Link could have been held or hidden in so many other places with a lot more ease, you know what I mean? And then the whole birthplace of Hyrule, I mean, yeah, it's the birthplace of Hyrule, but isn't that just kind of like of cultural and historical significance? How much do gods really care about that? I mean, who else would be able to move this thing? So, I needed a better reason. I needed a better reason to believe that the Great Plateau moved, so I started looking for some through the timeline in Hyrule Historia, and on page, I think it's 92, but like I have Hyrule Historia right here in front of me. Bear with me. So, yeah, it had to do with the Imprisoning War. Yeah, the Imprisoning War. So in the Imprisoning War, once Ganondorf has taken everything, he defeats Link, he acquires the Triforce of Courage, and becomes the Demon King, and becomes more powerful than in any other timeline. They need to seal him away, but there's no Link to do it. The king orders the sages to seal him away, and then that happens, but then after that, there's all these people that are trying to get the Triforce of Power and get into the Sacred Realm, like Ganondorf, and everyone's just hungry and lustful for this power, for this wish, this vision for the Triforce in the Sacred Realm. So the Imprisoning War begins, and it just creates this downward scale of shittiness for Hyrule. And I started to think, eventually, it kind of makes sense that to get the Sacred Realm away, they needed to put it in a secluded area far away from the rest of humanity. And if the Sacred Realm is the birthplace of Hyrule, is the Great Plateau, that would have it secluded from the rest of humanity. That would make sense, and that would be the best way to kind of alleviate all these, not alleviate, solve this problem of all these people lusting for the power of the Triforce in the Sacred Realm. That made sense to me, and that's a reason that I feel good about, logically speaking, for the Great Plateau having moved from the central Hyrule. That made sense. But since I was looking at the Imprisoning War, I realized, oh, this is in the Fallen Hero timeline. Maybe there's something here. So I started noticing even more details. The first detail I noticed is I was reading, let me quote you this piece right here. So, at last Ganondorf found himself in the possession of the Triforce of Wisdom that dealt within the Princess Zelda, and the Triforce of Courage that dwelt in Link. His true power achieved. He transformed into the Demon King. His true power achieved, he transformed into the Demon King. This is at the bottom of page 92 in Hyrule Historia. So, look at Calamity Ganon in Breath of the Wild. He's described as this force of nature that is highly destructive, more destructive than we've ever seen Ganon or Ganondorf ever. In fact, they make the stakes seem higher this time around. The stakes seem like, oh, well, the entire world is at stake here. It's not just Hyrule. That's how destructive this force of Calamity Ganon is. And in the Fallen Hero timeline, Ganon becomes the Demon King. His true power is achieved in the Fallen Hero timeline. He is stronger than in any other timeline in the Fallen Hero timeline. So maybe there's a connection here between his power in the Fallen Hero timeline and the ferocity and strength of Calamity Ganon. So, the connection between the Demon King in the Fallen Hero timeline and Calamity Ganon in Breath of the Wild isn't the only connection I saw. There was actually this interview with Eiji Aonuma, and he was asked about the timeline, and he told us he wasn't going to say much, but he was willing to say this. As you probably saw in the trailer, the most recent trailer, there's a woman's voice, and she says, "The history of the royal family of Hyrule is also the history of the Calamity Ganon." And as you know, the Zelda series up until now is a history of repeated attacks by Ganon. Now let me read you this piece from the top of page 92 in Hyrule Historia. I have it on PDF, by the way, I'm reading it from my computer. So here we go. Of all the possible outcomes, Link, the hero of time, faced defeat at the hands of Ganondorf. The thief obtained the 3 pieces of the Triforce, transformed into the Demon King, Ganon, and continued to threaten the world in future eras. There we go. He continued to threaten the world in future eras. Just like Eiji Aonuma put an emphasis on the repeated attacks by Ganon upon the Breath of the Wild and the timeline it's in, here in Hyrule Historia, it's talking about how the Fallen Hero timeline can be depicted as a timeline that has faced repeated attacks by the Demon King, Ganon. So I think there's another connection here. It may be subtle, but the Fallen Hero timeline is a timeline that has received more attacks than any other by Ganon. He's been resurrected multiple times throughout the Fallen Hero timeline, and he's had the most impact. But throughout all of this, and the impacts and the attacks and the resurrections and the war for the Sacred Realm and all these different things and the lack of a hero in the beginning, Hyrule goes through a decline. It's described as, well, the timeline is named in Hyrule Story as the decline of Hyrule and the last hero. And everything that's described in the Fallen Hero timeline goes kind of hand in hand with the way the world is described in Breath of the Wild. It's a dystopian world of Breath of the Wild. It's gone through a decline, a destruction. It's all in ruins. It kind of goes hand in hand here with the way the world is described in the Fallen Hero timeline. Now, I think things are starting to connect here. The Great Plateau moved to get the Sacred Realm away from everyone lusting for its power. The Calamity Ganon, after Ganondorf achieved his true form, the Demon King, destroyed everything and couldn't be sealed entirely again. It was continually resurrected and had repeated attacks upon the Fallen Hero timeline. I think there's a case starting to build here. But I'm not done yet, guys. And I know there are people who have covered all the details I've already covered, but I'm going to get to some points that I think people haven't covered. So, get ready. Okay, so if you've been paying attention to all the trailers, you may have noticed that Link seems to have a very close relationship with Zelda. Yeah, but he also seems to be acting as her guardian, as a knight. We even see Link kneeling down behind some sort of royalty, exactly like a knight. I think it's pretty safe to assume that Link has taken on a lot of knightly roles in this game. Now, if you look at the 3 different timelines that are in consideration here, there's not really any evidence of any knightly Links in Twilight Princess, The Wind Waker, or any of those timelines at all. But in the Fallen Hero timeline, there's actually a line, a bloodline, and a membership and an organization of knights, and Link is a part of it. So let me read you this excerpt that's about a link to the past, and it's towards the bottom of page 94 in Hyrule Historia. So here we go. Princess Zelda, imprisoned in the dungeon, sent out a telepathic cry for help. It was a young boy, Link, and his uncle, who lived together near the castle, who heard her plea. The two were the last surviving members of the Knights of Hyrule. So here in the Fallen Hero timeline, we have an actual line of knighthood, and Link is a part of it. And in Breath of the Wild, Link also seems to be a part of a line of knighthood. He seems to be a member of the knighthood of Hyrule. Another connection between Breath of the Wild and the Fallen Hero timeline. Now let me get on with my final point. Now, we already know where the Master Sword is in Breath of the Wild, at least for a part of it, and that is in front of the Deku Tree in the Lost Woods, or wherever the Deku Tree is. He's always in the Lost Woods. So, where is the Master Sword in the Wind Waker timeline, the adult timeline? It's in Hyrule Castle. After the events of Ocarina of Time, for some reason, it's eventually moved into Hyrule Castle, in some sort of hidden chamber. Okay. What about the Twilight Princess timeline? After it stays in the Temple of Time, all throughout. How about the Fallen Hero timeline? It's always found in the Lost Woods. Always found in the Lost Woods. And where is the Master Sword? In front of the Deku Tree, and the Deku Tree is always in the Lost Woods. The placement of the Master Sword, it marks a significant change. It was no longer able to be in the Temple of Time for some reason. It needed to be in the Lost Woods by the Deku Tree. Maybe this is explained in Breath of the Wild, but again, it is another connection between the Fallen Hero timeline and Breath of the Wild. Alright, so I may have relayed a number of points that support Breath of the Wild taking place in the Fallen Hero timeline relatively well, but I think we should also consider the other 2 timeline options here. Now, before we continue, if you don't know it already, it's already been confirmed that this game takes place after the events of Ocarina of Time. It was confirmed in a recent interview by Eiji Aonuma, for the record. Now, what about the adult timeline, where Wind Waker takes place? Can it take place anywhere in between Ocarina of Time and the Wind Waker? Well, the Hero of Winds is supposed to be the first hero since the Hero of Time. And since there was no Hero of Time to protect Hyrule from the destruction and ferocity of Ganon or whatever, everything was flooded. So there was no Hyrule to protect. It was gone until the Hero of Winds comes in the Wind Waker. And at the end of the Wind Waker, the oceans come down and destroy whatever's left of Hyrule. Then Link and friends and everyone migrate to a whole new land. There aren't really any Hylians left. So maybe the tree's dream does come true and all the water's soaked up many years later, but there's no one there left. Not really, maybe some come in, maybe it's possible. It is possible. And then we also do have the Koroks and the Rito, but in Twilight Princess HD we see those panels that depict the Rito in an entirely different timeline. So the Rito and the Koroks can be in other timelines. So that's not really enough evidence to really put the Wind Waker in the conversation for the game, where the timeline where Breath of the Wild takes place. Oh, but what about the ancient sea salts we see in the Great Plateau? Well, there are other ancient seas in the Legend of Zelda series. look at Skyward Sword. There are multiple seas there. So I don't think that's enough. So it's not entirely impossible that the game takes place in the Wind Waker, or rather the adult timeline, but it just doesn't seem likely to me. Now, what about Twilight Princess? Can it take place somewhere in between Twilight Princess and Ocarina of Time as a prequel to Twilight Princess? I don't think so, because Ganondorf in Twilight Princess is the same Ganondorf in Ocarina of Time. He's lived all the way up from Ocarina of Time to Twilight Princess, and I think it's supposed to be like 100 years or so, something like that approximately. I don't think there's enough time or room to fit Breath of the Wild in between there with Ganondorf in between. It doesn't make any sense, not really, especially with Calamity Ganon. There's no signs of Calamity Ganon at all in Twilight Princess, not really. Now, what about afterwards? Well, the Sheikah have a strong influence in Breath of the Wild. They may have been banished, but they have a strong influence in Breath of the Wild. In Twilight Princess, they have practically none. There's one final survivor, an old lady in this destroyed village, basically. I think there may be one other person, but basically the Sheikah have died out. They're gone. And also, the Deku Tree is nowhere to be found in Twilight Princess. For whatever reason, something happened between Ocarina of Time and Twilight Princess. The Deku Tree, the Koroks, the Kokiri, they're all gone. That's not the case in Breath of the Wild. So I don't think it's likely at all that it takes place in the child timeline. So that pretty much leaves either the off chance it takes place in the adult timeline or somewhere in the Fallen Hero timeline. And that's where I think it is, somewhere in the Fallen Hero timeline. When you consider that the Demon King is the most powerful Ganon that we've seen all throughout the Zelda franchise, the entire series, and this Calamity Ganon is also a depiction of Ganon at probably the strongest he's ever been on a world-destroying scale. And it's been said in both the trailer and from AJ Newell, this is a Ganon who has had repeated attacks upon the land of Hyrule, just like the Ganon, the Demon King, in the Fallen Hero timeline. Not only that, guys, but this Hyrule we're seeing in Breath of the Wild is that Hyrule has gone through a decline, a decay. It's kind of like a dystopian world, just like everything that is described for the world of Hyrule in the Fallen Hero timeline. And the only line of nights where Link takes place in is in the Fallen Hero timeline. Yet in Breath of the Wild, what do we see? Link as a knight, essentially. And then finally, guys, the Master Sword. The Master Sword placement has always been a very pivotal and important piece to pretty much every Zelda game. And the Master Sword is supposed to be in the Temple of Time, but eventually, in the Fallen Hero timeline, it is moved. It's always in the Lost Woods for some reason. And in Breath of the Wild, where do we see the Master Sword? By the Deku Tree in the woods, and the Deku Tree is always in the Lost Woods. Why is it there? Why was it separated? It could probably be explained in Breath of the Wild. We don't know. Until we play the game, it's a mystery in Breath of the Wild. And where exactly the game takes place in the Fallen Hero timeline? Another mystery in Breath of the Wild. Is it the Hero of Time that we're dealing with here? Is it the hero from A Link to the Past or the hero from the NES games? It's hard to say. Another mystery in Breath of the Wild. It's hard to say, guys, but I think we finally pinpointed at least that the game takes place somewhere in the Fallen Hero timeline. Voice your opinions in the comments below, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. This is kind of a lot of work for me, but again, I really love doing this, and I hope you guys really love watching it. Again, please give me a like if you enjoyed the video. I would really appreciate it. And if you want to see more content from me on Just Restart, please subscribe. Anyways, guys, that's all for now. See you later.